Hello and welcome to episode 84 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and coach, Anna Manning, and today we're going to be talking about executive skills or executive functions at work. And I'm not talking about being an executive and the skills and functions that you need to be an executive, although I guess that would be a useful episode for you guys too. But when I'm talking about executive skills or executive functions, I'm talking about the mental skills that include things like memory, flexible thinking, and emotional control. And these are skills and functions that we use day to day at work, well, just to manage our everyday life, but certainly to manage things at work. And trouble with our executive functions or those executive skills can make it hard for us to focus. It can make it hard for us to follow direction or handle emotions. It can make it hard for us to plan, prioritize, manage our time. And given that so much of the stuff that we do at work requires those types of skills, requires those types of functions, and I'm going to use those words interchangeably throughout this podcast. So you might hear me call them executive skills or executive functions. It's essentially the same thing. It's just those brain processes that I was just talking about. So much of our workday requires us to use those skills and those functions. And although my primary work, and obviously my primary work here with the podcast, is to do with confidence, but it is something, or our executive function, our executive skills is something which impacts and can impact our confidence at work. Because just imagine that you're technically really good at your job, but you can't seem to get organized or stay focused long enough on tasks to actually show everybody what you can do. Or just imagine that you have trouble controlling your responses in a professional setting. Now, those things are just two examples of our executive functions, our executive skills, which can, quite frankly, lead to us feeling less confident than we might at work. And you may not know this, but in my early life as a coach, as well as doing general workplace coaching, I trained as an executive function coach. And that's because I used to, I think, struggle with some executive function challenges myself. And I have really, one of my really well developed skills, one of my really well developed executive functions is metacognition. So I was able to stand back from those challenges, think about how I was going to address them, and then go about systematically addressing those challenges until I could manage them. Now, there's still some things that I struggle with, like managing and organizing. If I'm not really using my diary, I struggle. But I was able to deal with those executive function challenges in such a way that it meant that I could keep things running smoothly at work for the most part. But some of the work that I've done with adults, and some of these adults have ADHD or another executive other executive function challenges, or other types of neurodiversity, they might struggle even more than somebody else. So we all have an executive function profile. We all have areas where we're stronger and weaker. That's just normal. But if there's areas where you're weaker, or even you may be thinking of the people working for you, if there's areas of executive skills where they're weaker, you're probably going to notice that at work. If there's areas where you're weaker, you're also probably going to notice that at work. And I wanted to talk about it on the podcast because a lot of people don't even really know about executive skills or executive functions, and they don't know that you can do something to improve areas where you're struggling or areas where you're weaker. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about that on today's podcast. And the first thing that I want to do is just walk you through a list of what those executive functions, those executive skills are. And you'll recognize these from your everyday life because, like I said at the beginning, these are just a set of mental processes that you use to keep things running smoothly. And I like to imagine it like a kind of project manager who's directing things in my brain all the time. And that project manager might be really strong in some areas to keep things running smoothly and efficiently in the way that I want, and it might really struggle in other areas. So the first executive skill is response inhibition. And that is the capacity to think before you act and resist urges to, let's say or do something, and allows you the time to evaluate a situation and think about how your behavior might impact on it. So, people who are strong in response inhibition, they know how to hold it even when things are tricky or challenging. So they might be the voice of reason in an argument, and they're probably able to stop and consider before they say something. And if you're weak in response inhibition, you might be the person who's more likely to kind of put your foot in it, put your foot in your mouth, say the wrong thing, and then think afterwards, oh God, I wish I hadn't said that. And you may blurt things out without thinking about the ramifications. So when you think about how important that is in the workplace, it's pretty obvious, right? So we all have moments of challenge at work. We all have moments where there's things that we really would probably like to say to people and say about particular situations. But for the most part, probably we kind of hold that inside and we hold our fire. But if this is a weak area of executive skill for you, then you might find that harder to do. So that's the first one. The second one is called working memory, and that's the ability to hold information in your memory while you're performing complex tasks. And it incorporates the ability to draw on your past learning or experiences and apply that to things you're working on in the future. So if you've got strong working memory, you've got no trouble keeping track of things you've got to do or appointments or stuff that's in your diary. You also might be able to remember details from conversations or important information about people. And if you're weak in working memory, you might say that you're forgetful, or more weak in working memory. You might say you're forgetful. You might lose track of everything when you're focused on something particular. You might forget your dentist appointment. You might lose track of little details. You might forget to pick up milk on the way home. You might forget that your boss just asked you to do that one thing. And this is working memory is a real challenge for me. That's one of my lower executive function skills, or one of my weaker executive function skills. So I just know that I can't rely on my memory. I know that I have to write it down or put it in a diary, and that really helps me. That one thing of just knowing, don't rely on your brain, Anna, because it's not gonna it's not gonna work. Although interestingly, I remember amazing amounts of detail about the things that people have told me. Um and if you're my client, you'll probably know this. So I probably remember every single bit of conversation that I've had with you if you're sitting in front of me, and I can really hold all that and use it to work with you. So that's strong in terms of working memory. But my other things like remembering dates and what I'm doing and terrible. The next executive function skill is emotional control. And that's our ability to manage our emotions and be able to achieve goals and tasks, or you be able to manage emotions such that we can achieve goals and tasks. And if you're strong in emotional control, you'll be able to keep your emotions in check, even if the situation's pretty stressful or pretty difficult or challenging. And you'll probably be able to react calmly if there's an emergency situation, a confrontation, um, and you may not be as easily sort of baited. So I think you've probably all seen those situations where somebody's trying to get a rise out of someone, and if you have really good emotional control or strong emotional control, you're less likely to be baited than someone who's got poor emotional control. So if you're weaker in emotional control, you might fly off the handle more, or you may kind of feel those emotions rising really strongly, perhaps more easily than some other people. You may get easily stressed and find it difficult to manage in certain situations, particularly ones where things are difficult or challenging for you. And as I'm talking about this, I just want you to remember that all of us have an executive function skills profile, which is to say that all of us have areas where we're stronger and all of us have areas where we're weaker. So if you're noticing as we go through here, you're like, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. That one's more of a challenge for me. That's just normal. So the next area is called sustained attention. And sustained attention is our capacity to keep our attention focused on a situation or a task. So even if you're slightly fatigued, even if you're fairly bored, or even in the face of other distractions, you can stay focused on your task. And I always think about this in terms of an open plan office, right? So, sustained attention can be difficult for us humans, especially if we're working on something that is difficult or frustrating or boring. But imagine in that open plan office, right? You've got all these other competing distractions. There might be someone having a conversation in the corner. There might be, someone throwing their arms around in a meeting room. There might be the pinging of a coffee machine, right? There's all these different things that are happening. But we need to have good sustained attention if we're going to be able to do our work and complete our work. So if you've got strong sustained attention, you've probably not got a lot of difficulty with persisting through a task, even in the face of those kind of challenges that we just talked about. You'll probably be better at screening out distractions and continuing in order to get something done. But if you've got weaker sustained attention, you probably find it more challenging, well, what it says on the tin, to sustain your attention in order to get tasks done. So you might struggle to finish things, or you might be more susceptible to interruptions and then find it difficult to get back into what you're doing. Now, all of us, I think, have difficulty in our modern world and in our modern workplaces with digital distraction. And we know from the research that digital distractions, even if you've got really good sustained attention, cause problems and take your attention away. So one of the things we're going to be talking about in this episode is how to modify your environment, because it's one of the things that you can do to improve those executive functions that you find more tough or more challenging. But back to the list of executive functions. So the next one is planning and prioritizing. So that's the ability to create a roadmap, to reach a goal, or to complete a task. And it involves being able to make decisions about what is actually important along the way. So if you're strong on planning and prioritizing, you probably can do multi-step tasks really well or more easily. And you can just easily see all the tasks that would need to be undertaken in order to complete something, even if that's multi-step or it's, fairly complex. You're probably really good at that. Probably so good at it, in fact, that you've never even thought about it as a strength. You can probably just see something that needs to be done and you can kind of map it out in your mind, even if you need to write it down in order to get that task done. For people who've got weaker planning and prioritization, that skill, it can be really, really tough. So if you've got weaker planning and prioritization, you may struggle to see what's important. You may struggle to kind of conceive of a multi-task step or multitask goal or like a multitask process. You may find that really tough in order to work out, what do I need to do, what needs to be done when, what order do I need to do things in, what's more important, what's less important. And for some people, that is just a very, very challenging thing for them to do. And then for some people, it seems to be very easy. But again, it's an executive function skill where some people are stronger, some people are weaker. So and I'm just thinking there about, like, I've known people who are very competent, capable project manager type people. And they probably, if you've ended up in that job, you probably have strong planning and prioritization. Um, I would not be very good at that job, and I don't think I would do it. Like, I can do it, and I have done it, but it requires really it requires me to use my other executive function, um, and my other executive skills really in a way that I just tires me out. So, the next one is organization, and that's what it says on the tin, the ability to create and maintain systems and keep track of information or things, materials. So, if you've got strength in organization, maybe your living space is quite neat and tidy. You may have things where they should be or where you want them to be. And if you return from holiday, you might unpack your suitcase straight away. If your organization is weaker, things might seem to accumulate. So, whether that is pieces of paper on the side, whether that is emails in an inbox, whether that is stuff all over your desk. And maybe if you ask someone, oh, if they've got weaker organization, you might be like, can you send me that document? They might think, where on earth is that document, right? Maybe they've got really good systems in place so they know where the document is, but you're more likely to have a kind of messy physical environment. You may be in these modern times. I think you're also more likely to have a cluttered digital environment as well, which can be very stressful. Organization is something naturally is one of my weaker executive functions. At work, actually, I'm militant, so I find it easier at work. But at home, I'm fairly disorganized, I would say, fairly scatty, and stuff builds up and I leave stuff all over the place. Like, I've got enough in the tank to be really militant at work. I do not have enough in the tank to be really militant at home as well. So I have to have specific ways of doing things that make my organization easier. So the next one is time management. So that's capacity to estimate how much time you've got, how to allocate it, and then how to stay within those time limits and deadlines. And it's also a sense that time is important. So if you think about little kids, they don't have any sense of when they're really little, they don't have any sense of time, right? Even tomorrow or yesterday, they do not get. But as we get into adulthood, if you have strong time management skills, you're probably going to be able to meet deadlines. You're probably going to be able to arrive on time for meetings, for appointments. You can judge, and this is part of this skill, you can judge pretty well how long it's going to take to do a particular task. And you can make adjustments if you need to, like speeding up by doing something in more of a draft way rather than having everything perfect and just not being able to do it on time. So, if your time management is weaker, you'll tend to have a harder time with time estimation. So, you may really struggle to say, I don't really know how long that's going to take me, or I don't really know. And that can be a problem for people at work. It's like, how long is that going to take? And they're like, I don't really know. So, it's can be difficult for people to estimate. You may also have more trouble meeting deadlines, which again, tricky thing at work because it's what we're required to do all the time. There may be little deadlines, there may be big deadlines. And you may also find it more difficult if this is weak for you to speed up if you need to in order to meet a deadline or get something done on time. And you may be late, possibly, for meetings, for events, or you may be the one that's like running in at the last minute on your last legs, as we would call it, at work. So that is time management. The next one is flexibility. And that's the ability to be able to revise plans if you have to. So if there's an obstacle or if there's a challenge, it's the ability to kind of take on setbacks, new information, mistakes, and adapt to changing conditions, replan, and go again. So if you're good at flexibility, if you have that executive function skill, if that's a strength for you, you might be able to deal with it quite easily when something unexpected gets thrown in at work. So you've got all of this planned, you know what you're doing, and then suddenly the priority changes and this new thing is given to you. Now, if you've got really good flexibility, you might be able to take that in your stride. You might be able to look at it, replan, adjust, and get going with what you need to do now. So if this executive skill for you is weaker, if flexibility is weaker, you might be more inflexible. So let's say you've got your week plan, you've got your stuff planned, and then something again is thrown over the wall and you've got, suddenly things go awry. You're going to find that a lot harder. So that could throw you for a loop. And if something unexpected happens, you may find it more difficult to readjust, replan, and reset. So you may find it more hard to come up with a plan B if plan A really isn't working. The next executive skill is metacognition. Now, most of them you could probably have a guess at, but this one, I didn't know what it meant when I first encountered it. But it's the ability to kind of stand back and take a bird's eye view of yourself in a situation. And it's the ability to observe how you problem solve. Now, that includes like self monitoring, self evaluation, reflection. So asking, how am I doing? Or how did I do there? And you probably have noticed in your life that some people are quite good at self evaluation and reflection, and some people maybe don't do that as much. And it's part of our executive function profile, part of our strengths or weaknesses. So if you're really strong in metacognition, you can probably see the forest rather than just focusing on an individual tree. And you can see the pieces of the puzzle and how they fit together. Now, it's unfortunately it's a bit difficult to explain this without using metaphors, which may be very annoying for you. It's very annoying for some people, but if you are good at metacognition, you're probably quite good at connecting disparate ideas, disparate disciplines. You're making the connections between things. So people might tell you you're a lateral thinker. You may have heard that. And you may be good at stopping in a situation to think, wait a minute, is this working? If not, is there something I could do differently? And then do that thing differently. So this is a stupid example, but I think metacognition is my highest actually on the profile. And I remember years and years ago when I first started in one of my legal jobs, we all had to do more typing. So we used to have our own secretary, and then we had to share them, and they just got thinner and thinner on the ground until I just think they probably disappeared in the end. So we all ended up doing our own, admin, our own secretarial support, which now seems completely normal. And what I realized was that my typing was really quite slow compared to like my old secretary. Her typing was unbelievably fast. Now mine was rubbish. And I had to stare at the keyboard, which meant I made loads of mistakes when I was typing. So I thought, well, that's a bit unsatisfactory. If I'm going to be my own secretary, I need to acquire this skill of typing and get, really good at it really fast. So I said to my boss, right, I need a touch typing course. She was like, "Oh, why?" I was like, "Well, we obviously need to be good at typing now." And she was like, "Well, no one else has asked me for it." And now I know it's probably because their metacognition wasn't as high, or maybe they were already really good at typing. I don't know. But so I got this touch typing thing and I taught myself how to touch type. And I was slow for like 3 days or maybe even 4 days while I was learning. And it was pretty painful. And my colleagues at the time were like, "Oh no, I'm not going to do it. I do need to be better at typing because I still stare at the keyboard instead of looking at the screen." And if you know some old people in your life, you'll notice that they probably do this too, right? And type with two fingers. And that's what I used to do when I was a lot younger. And they said, "Oh no, I can't take 3 days out of my, working life being slow, or I can't take 3 days out of my week being slow at typing because I'll get behind." And I was able to think forward into the future and be like, why on earth would you not be slow for 3 days in order to be fast for the next 30 years? But other people around me didn't seem to quite get that. So that's an example of metacognition or good metacognition, being able to stand back and have a look and have a think and do something, which is going to change things for the better. So, if you're bad at metacognition, you might struggle to do that. You might focus on isolated details. You might be more in the immediate and not be able to kind of think about things into the future such that you might change something today. You may also have trouble with connecting the dots. And when I worked in strategy, when I worked in policy and strategy, I we used to do things where we would be building a new corporate strategy or creating a new corporate strategy, and there would be people who well, we would ask everybody to be involved. So we would be thinking about the big issues that the organization was facing, the big issues in the environment that the organization was working in. And some people found it really easy to connect those dots and come up with ideas and think about challenges and think about solutions. And there was other people that just didn't really seem to be able to do it. And I always thought, gosh, this is so strange. Why are they not able to do that? But again, now I know that this is to do with our metacognition, and some people are stronger and some people are weaker, just like every area. So the next one is goal directed persistence. And I hope you are still with me. I hope your goal directed persistence is high with this podcast, because I realize it's going to be a longer episode than normal. So, goal directed persistence is exactly what it says on the tin. It's our ability to follow through and persist to achieve a goal, even when things might be challenging, might be tricky, there might be distractions, there might be competing interests. So, if you've got this strength, you'll probably find that you're able to finish things, you're able to get to the goal despite challenges or difficulties along the way. If goal directed persistence is weaker for you, you probably find achieving goals harder. Even if you're not happy with how things are unfolding, you may not be able to reset and continue on in a way that you want to. So, I think goal directed persistence is probably, now maybe it's not difficult for all of us. I found goal directed persistence tricky or tough, especially at parts of my life. I don't struggle with it so much anymore. I've developed that skill. But I used to. So if you find goal directed persistence hard, you might start a lot of things and maybe not finish them. You maybe are not one of those people who will just plod along until you get to the end. The next one, and this is the last one, is stress tolerance. So that's the ability to be in stressful situations, cope with uncertainty, cope with change, and cope with performance demands. So we have all of those things at work, right? I'm sure you have stressful situations, uncertainty, change, and performance demands. Now, some people, if their skill is developed in this area, their stress tolerance is developed, will find that easier to handle than others. And some people will find it harder. So, if your stress tolerance is high, you're probably going to be all right with a bit of unpredictability at work. You're probably going to be okay with them setting, hours targets or billings targets or something like that, and you being able to cope with that. So at the extreme end of the stress tolerance, I think, are probably the people who you might call adrenaline junkies. Certainly not one of them. And if you're weaker in stress tolerance, if your stress tolerance is low, you may prefer to know what's coming next. You may not like unpredictability at work. And you may find your work more difficult to deal with if you're under pressure or you'll feel like you're under stress. So they are the executive functions, the executive skills. And I hope that was useful to you to hear a bit about them and think through some of the examples. And as I said, one of the reasons that I wanted to share these with you is because our executive skills make up a lot of what we do at work every day. They are the mental processes that keep our day running, that keep us able to start, able to plan, able to prioritize, able to use our emotional control when things don't go the way that we want them to, able to use our goal directed persistence when we really need to get something done, able to use our metacognition when things aren't uh, as maybe they should be or could be, and we might need to make changes. So they're vital mental processes which are happening all of the time. And some people are weaker and some people are stronger in all different areas. We all have a different profile. But it's useful to know that it doesn't matter what your executive function profile is, you can make changes and improvements. And the coaching that I do, which is it's very different from the confidence coaching. The coaching that I do with executive functions is skills building. So you'll take a particular skill where somebody's weaker and you'll help them to become stronger in that skill. And it's not like, oh, I can either do it or I can't. Somebody might be weak on organization, like me, for instance, but you can build that skill and you can learn strategies. You can modify your environment to make that easier for you. Now, are you ever going to be the best in the world at that? Probably not. But what it does mean is you can get to a point where it's no longer a problem, or at least you've got systems, processes, and enough skill built to be able to make it through your workday without it being a problem. So, if you're interested in learning more about it, there is a great book which I've been quoting from during this episode, which is called The Smart But Scattered Guide to Success by Peg Dawson and Richard Guar. I don't know how you pronounce that, but I love it. And I've used it a lot, both with clients and to build my own executive function skills. So if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, I'm interested in that, obviously Google, there is loads of information on Google. Or if you get the book, there is a profile, an executive function profile, and you can do some scoring in there, find out about yours, find out about your areas of weakness. And then there's loads of information which you can use to improve those skills where you're weaker to make your workday run a little bit more smoothly. So I hope that was useful. If you want to know more from me, or if you want to find out more about executive function coaching specifically, and this is not this in the context that I've done it, it's often for people who might have a diagnosis of ADHD or another type of neurodiversity. But I think all of us have particular executive functions that we struggle with and things that we could improve to make our work life easier. So if you're thinking that after you've listened to this episode, I'm happy to talk and see whether there's any support I can give you or whether there's anywhere else that I would signpost you to get some more help. And a last thing about confidence, because that's always what I'm talking about when it comes to work. And what I know about my clients who've had executive skill challenges in the workplace is it can really knock your confidence. So you might be really good at your job, but if you just can't get organized enough to meet a deadline, then you're not going to look great at your job, or other people are going to become annoyed with you. And it's not because you're not good at what you do or you're not smart, but you maybe have an executive function challenge or a skill challenge, which makes it harder for you to do everything you need to do at work. So that can lead to a loss of confidence. And no wonder, right? If you're the one who's always perfectly organized and turns everything in on time, great. But if you're not, or there's some particular things that you find more challenging, it can knock your confidence and just make you feel rubbish around work. And it also makes it more stressful and anxiety provoking. So if that's you and there's areas of executive function challenge that you've got, just know everybody has particular challenges and you can develop your skill to make it so that it's no longer such an issue. And they used to think that only kids could make those kinds of changes. They now know that adults can too. Yes, it's true that we could take on those skills quicker when we're younger, but we know that, and I know from working with people, that you can develop each of these skills and modify your environment and make changes to make things easier for you. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And I'm sorry about the audio on last week's. It was rubbish. I was using a new recording thing and I made a bit of an error with it. Anyway, hopefully we're back to good recording quality this week, and I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.